Welcome to my messy studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an art professor and an artist who draws with fountain pens. And in this short lesson, I'm going to show you a really compact, effective sketching technique using semi-waterproof inks. That is to say, inks that have both waterproof and non-waterproof components. Let's get started. Most fountain pen inks fall into two broad categories, either being entirely waterproof or completely water-soluble. Each have their place in an artist's ink arsenal, but there are also a number of inks that fall somewhere in between. So far, I've discovered only three. Noodler's brown, which is a rich orange brown that creates a lovely golden wash when you go over it with a water brush. Then there's a fantastic black options, Noodler's Heart of Darkness, which is highly monochrome both in its line work and the wash it creates. And then there's an ink made by Noodler's called Black Swan in Australian Roses. While some artists consider this property a flaw, it can be used in a really interesting way for sketching with a water brush. Here's how the technique works with Noodler's brown. You put down some lines, and then after they dry, go over them with a water brush. While the waterproof component of the ink stays put, the non-waterproof component creates a wash, which can be used to create soft transitions, much the same way you would use ink in combination with ink washes. The process of putting down lines and creating washes can be done multiple times until the desired contrast is achieved. As I've hopefully proved, Noodler's brown works absolutely great in this technique, creating a rich brown line and a complex golden wash. Heart of Darkness works equally well, but is a bit more temperamental, perhaps because the washes it creates are darker and harder to control. Black Swan in Australian Roses, however, is cloying, good for Valentine's Day cards and not much else. But what do you do if you want to work with other colors of ink? Well, here's the good news. By combining waterproof and non-waterproof inks, you can easily make your own semi-waterproof ink that works just as well as the ones I showed you. While there are certain fountain pen inks, such as the artist's inks made by D. Atramentis, which are designed to be mixed together, the age-old advice for mixing ink is to never ever do it, because doing so can cause an adverse chemical reaction that makes the coloring agents precipitate, clump together, and clog up your pen. But the reason the advice is age-old is because there was a time when fountain pens were simply not designed to come apart for easy cleaning. When removing the grip section required a heat gun to melt the shellac, gluing it to the barrel, and removing the feed required a knockout block. But nowadays there are plenty of pens that can be pulled apart and given a thorough cleaning in seconds, so far greater risks can be taken. And if you're sheepish, you can simply let your ink mixture sit in a vial for a day and see what happens. To illustrate, here are some Frankenstein inks that I've mixed up. The first is a mix of platinum carbon ink and diamine gray, which produces a lighter, more controlled wash than Noodler's brown. The wash released from the lines is very gentle, but if you want more, you can increase the proportion of gray ink in the mixture. An interesting possibility is combining colored ink with black carbon ink. Here I've combined carbon black with diamine matador. The interesting thing is that this saturated crimson ink becomes considerably softer when used this way, so you can use even very brightly colored inks and not get overly saturated, garish results. Here is another case in point, a mix of carbon ink and Noodler's green marine, which is a highly saturated turquoise ink. In this method, however, it becomes quite muted, a pleasantly dusky grayish green. While I think carbon black works best, leaving clean, sharp lines, Noodler's bulletproof ink also works just fine, and because of its greater transparency, produces lines that are more greatly affected by the color of the ink it's mixed with. Here I've mixed it with Noodler's blue, which not only creates a lovely bluish wash, but also gives a hint of blue to the waterproof lines. And lastly, your waterproof ink does not have to be limited to black. Here is my favorite waterproof brown ink, Document Brown, made by D. Atramentis, mixed with diamine sepia. The possibilities are really endless here, and so far, after trying something like a dozen or so combinations, I haven't encountered problems with pigments precipitating or clogging. However, in the interest of preventing a flood of angry comments, I would still encourage you to proceed with caution, to let your Frankenstein inks sit in a vial for a few days, and even then, only using them in pens that are easy to clean. The great thing about working with semi-waterproof inks is that it's an extremely portable technique requiring little else other than a pen and a water brush. here is a little set that I put together for that purpose, which consists of a small pocket pen. In this case, a pocket pen made by Ensso in the Ultem finish. And then I have a small Pentel compact water brush, a clutch pencil made by Hahnemuller. This is the Versatile 5608, and a paper towel, which is essential to controlling the wetness of the water brush. All of it can fit in a small case like this pocketable Galen leather pen case made for 2 pens, or even something smaller like this Franklin Christoph pouch. This pocket pen is unfortunately no longer available, but is a great option because it fits the excellent number 6 Ultraflex nib from Fountai Pen Revolution, and because it's an eyedropper filled pen, it gives it a lot of ink capacity despite its small size. A great, far cheaper option, and one that's still widely available, is the Moonman Wankai. But really, any pen with ample ink capacity and the ability to be easily cleaned will be perfectly fine for this purpose. For my drawing, I'll be using a Hahnemuller Akademie watercolor sketchbook, which works very well for this technique. Before committing to a longer drawing, check to see how the ink performs on the paper you're going to use. Some papers work better than others, and it's sometimes hard to predict the results, but generally I find that less absorbent papers do better, and more absorbent papers do worse. Now let me show you how to do a drawing using this technique. I filled the pen with a mix of platinum, carbon black, and Noodler's blue. I had to play with the ratio of inks and found that a ratio of a 1 part carbon ink and 2 parts Noodler's blue was ideal, giving me enough wash to work with while leaving the black lines nice and sharp. A full, real-time explanation of this technique will be available to channel members, who, for a small monthly fee, get access to a large library of long-form tutorials and 2 new videos every single month. Not only is a membership to my channel a great way to support the content that I publish here for free, it allows me to make unrushed tutorials for a small, discerning audience without the pressure of pandering to the YouTube algorithm. Please consider becoming a channel member. This way of working shares many similarities with traditional ink and wash technique, and anyone with experience working in pen and watercolor will take to this medium very quickly. But there is one marked difference in that it requires you to work in carefully defined stages, generally background to foreground. This is because if the entire drawing is inked all at once, then certain lines will create washes in areas where I don't want them to go. So in this technique, the first step is to put lines and hatching into the sky, go over them with a water brush to create washes, let that area dry, before moving to the castle in the middle ground. The process is repeated with lines put down in the middle ground and washes created and allowed to dry before proceeding to the line work in the foreground. This simple, easy to adhere to method allows me to control my washes and create drawings with the same ease as a regular pen and wash technique. The washes, since they're composed of ink, aren't quite as well behaved as watercolor, but to my mind, the unevenness creates a pleasing contrast with the tightness of the line work. Note that so far I haven't darkened the rooftops of the castle. This is because I'm going to use a different technique here. Instead of applying lines and then creating a wash out of them, I simply lift ink directly from the nib into the water brush and then apply it to the paper. This creates a gray wash instead of a purely blue one, adding an additional degree of color complexity. This is an additional benefit to working with an ink mixture with differently colored inks. Here is the completed drawing. As I've hopefully convincingly demonstrated, with a bit of planning and technical trickery, this technique can be used to create finished ink and wash drawings using just a few highly portable materials. Would the result be superior if it was done with traditional methods? Perhaps, but this way of working is highly suited for situations where using a palette would be difficult, where, for example, you need to work standing up or just on the fly. And I think the creative possibilities of being able to mix your own custom semi-waterproof ink are pretty exciting, especially if the colors of waterproof ink and the water-soluble inks are different as they are here. Thanks so much for watching, and see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye for now.